Good morning, everybody. It's here on this regularly scheduled Saturday morning call that many of you are on every single week. I'm honored to be with you today and have a special guest star in the form of Czap, who many of you have heard about, but probably have never had the opportunity to see in person or to hear from directly. And we get that privilege today. I think we're scheduled for an hour. It's going to go fast, and we might even go a little bit long. But I don't think that you're going to be upset about that, because I think you're going to really like the information. I want to thank Al for getting on. Just a little bit of background. I first met Al, I think, back in '94 or '95, so back a long way. And I had just joined the nutritional dietary supplement industry as a lawyer for a company that was not in network marketing, not in direct sales. It was a retail company called Natural Balance. I knew very little about supplements, next to nothing. And Al had already carved out for himself a very strong place in the industry as the founder and CEO of a company called Thorne Research, which was then and still is very well known for formulating very unique formulations, primarily for therapeutic and practitioner use. And I'll tell you that our relationship got off to a bit of a rocky start, because as a lawyer, I was too much of a lawyer in one of our contracts. And Al, in a very Czap kind of way, told me that I probably should change my direction a little bit in regards to our contract. It remains something that we laugh about to this day, because it was very, very funny. And he's a very smart guy in many ways. And when we first were starting ACTIVZ, I called him up. And Al and I had not stayed in strong contact over the years. I was generally aware of things such as he'd sold Thorne Research and was doing some other things. And he was aware of some of my stops along the way. But he said, what are you calling me for? Did you accidentally call the wrong number? And I said, no, I wanted to talk with you because I've started a company and we are looking for unique, scientifically validated products. And I knew that you'd be the right guy to talk to. And he certainly was. So we're glad to have him today. We're going to be talking about Link. We're going to be talking about Optimum. We're going to be talking about the Psylocke process and understand a little bit more about this very unique and special delivery system. And you'll probably hear some other things that accidentally come out about some things we might be working on in the product pipeline. So strap in and stay tuned. This is going to be a lot of fun. So Al, I'm going to welcome you to the call. Thanks for joining us from Napa Valley today.
I'm glad to be here, David. It's actually kind of fun. This is only my third Zoom, I think, so I'm a novice.
Well, you're doing great. You're looking great, and we appreciate you taking the time today. I did a little bit of a background in regards to Thorne Research and some things that you've done. Maybe you just take a couple minutes and walk us through, getting into supplements and your philosophy about, developing formulations and the need for having real science and things like that before we just drill right down into our products.
Well, I got involved in the dietary supplement industry in 1981, and I was actually just doing sales for a company. They needed someone to go and sell throughout Canada. They had no presence there, and I lived a mile from the border, so I wangled my way into crossing the border every day and driving to Calgary or Toronto. I would fly out and spend 10 days or 2 weeks calling on doctors, and did that for a couple of years, and then moved on to a company in Portland, which was run by 3 preventive medical doctors and a businessman. And I felt it was a better fit because I thought their formulas were a lot more unique and things went well. They had a good presence in the doctor field, but I discovered 2/3, 3/4 of the way through that 1 year I spent with them that I went to an environmental medicine conference, and I discovered that the doctors were not happy with all the ingredients that were in the products that I was selling, and they didn't really want to buy any. So I went back and went through the manufacturing plant, and I insisted on seeing all their raw material sheets and all their analysis. And lo and behold, I found out that they were like almost everybody who were manufacturing products. They were big, horrible tablets that had binders and fillers and lubricants. And a lot of the raw materials had undisclosed ingredients on the label, because in a way you can do that because you only have to label the active ingredient. So I sent David actually some editorials I wrote when I published the Alternative Medicine Review. I started Thorne in 1984, sold it in 2010. And during that period for 17 years, I published the Alternative Medicine Review, which is a peer-reviewed medical journal. I since discontinued it in 2010 because it was very expensive and never made money. I lost a lot of money on it. But I wrote editorials on manufacturing and quality control and on analysis and ingredients that people used. And David has copies of those, so you can glance at those at some point, and you'll see that, as he said before, my writing style is a little blunt. And it pretty much made me the most hated guy in the industry, because when you start digging in and finding it, there's a whole pile of worms underneath what you've been standing on and basing everything on. People don't like it. So one of the things that happened is you have the raw materials. Nobody was using things that were absolutely pure except maybe vitamin C. Then you have the manufacturing process where you put something into a dosage form. And in many cases, if you take something like dicalcium phosphate as a filler and to help hold a tablet together, but if you mix it with mag stearate, it becomes an indigestible rock, and you can actually see x-rays of tablets sitting in people's colon. The raw materials, something like vitamin B12 or vitamin A, many of these came from pharma companies such as Hoffman La Roche. And on the label, if you had the vitamin A, you would just put vitamin A 10,000 units. And by FDA law, if in your factory where you're making something, you did not physically add something, some preservative or something, and it was already in the raw material, you didn't have to put it on the label. So patients in the environmental medicine arena would get sick from these products because they had BHT, BHA, potassium sorbate, sodium benzoate. And I knew once I found all this out that I had a potential niche. So I was able to make products that were undiluted, pure products. And that's where Thorne got its reputation. We were, everyone else could talk about it, but we were the guys who actually made the products where you could take something and not have a reaction, and it would be therapeutic, because so many people have digestive problems and they can't break down, even in capsules. When you mix a powder with magnesium stearate as a flowing agent, it makes it real slippery, and it's wonderful for machines, but you get high-speed production out of machines, but it can inhibit the absorption of something. And actually, I can send a link to you, Angie, if you want. It's a show I did. It's a TV show, and it's about 15 minutes where they're interviewing me, and then I show how digestion works and actually show the difference between a vitamin C product, pure vitamin C, in water, and then one that I bought off the shelf, which had mag stearate, and you pull it apart and you'll see that it won't go into solution. It just sits there. That means your body has to break all that stuff down. So this is where Thorne came in, and the doctors adored the stuff we were doing. By the time we were done, we were a large company. I had 130 employees, but it was time to retire and enjoy life, and ended up moving to Napa. And I did get a divorce, so things just didn't work out for where I was, but I was happily ensconced in Napa and having a good time. And the reason that we're all sitting here, and the reason that I have Tesseract, is because of this incredible woman who's my wife. And I actually have t-shirts with my wife's picture on them. I have a number of them. I'm not allowed to wear them when she's here, so she's off with her son for a few days. But anyway, Tony had some GI problems, and it struck me that the thing she needed was butyric acid. And butyric acid is produced in your body. It's what I call one of the God molecules. There are a few molecules in your body that are versatile. I mean, they do so many things, and they're hard to get from your diet, but they have incredible properties. And the other thing about butyric acid, this is butyric acid. Well, it's actually empty. I've had this sitting on a bench in my garage. If I had this full of butyric acid right now, and I went to a sports stadium that held maybe 15, 20,000 people, and I poured that 1.5 ounces on the basketball court in the middle of the sports stadium, in 20 minutes, everybody in the place would get up and leave and go, that's the worst smell I've ever smelled. It is the principal smell of human vomit. It is produced in your body. So when doctors say, wow, you should eat more fiber, it's not just because, things move along better. And it's because fiber, insoluble fiber, is the source of propionic acid, which is a very bad short chain fatty acid. It's implicated in autism and Parkinson's. You don't want too much. Then you have butyric acid, the incredible molecule. And the third thing you have that's even more abundant that comes from fiber is acetic acid, which is basically vinegar, much concentrated. So the healing power of butyric acid in the gut is amazing. And I mean, and the other things that it does for the brain and as an anti-inflammatory, but it is so vile that one cannot take it directly, because if you put even if you took a toothpick and touched it in here and put it on your tongue, you'd be at the sink, just literally with a toothbrush and a half a tube of toothpaste trying to get that taste off, and you'd be going virtually wanting to vomit. It's that nasty. So back in the 70s, Torben Niesby started a company, and he made salts where you can react this with a mineral salt, with a mineral oxide. So he could make calcium and bind it to the butyric acid, and it took away a fair amount of the smell, and the taste was still pretty bad. So they put it in capsules, and it was a miracle. It really, really helped people, but there was still a huge number of patients who just go, they'd open the bottle and go, I can't do this, it'll make me puke. So I knew that my wife, Tony, would not be able to take the sodium butyrate or the calcium butyrate. I mean, she's too sensitive. So I thought back at some of the things I've been doing in the past, and I'd made some stuff that are called co-crystals, where you're actually binding together a couple molecules. But I'd run across some data on what are called cyclodextrins. And somewhere back around 1897, some person took dextrin, which is a sugar, but they took it as a fiber, and they were able to connect together into little donut shapes, either a 6 or a 7 or an 8-sided cyclodextrin. And they look like a little donut, and they're literally, the largest one is 65 nanometers across, and there's 1 billion nanometers in 1 meter, which is a little over a yard. So
let me interrupt there, Al, for just a second. Hold your thought. And I think actually has a three-dimensional rendering of this type of thing. That put it up there while you're talking. So go ahead.
Okay, so if you see this, you'll see that inside there's a little molecule that's trapped. And just imagine that that's butyric acid, and surrounding it is the dextrin fiber. And these things are interlocked. Once the dextrin fiber itself is hard to break down. And what it does is, in the interior of this molecule, it likes things that are pretty much fat soluble. It will take other things in, but the outside of the molecule is water soluble, and it is attracted to water. So when you put it into water, it becomes a liquid. But when you want to react something, depending on the chemistry of it, some are very difficult, some are easier. But depending on the chemistry, it's kind of like a little mini vacuum cleaner. It's got room in the vacuum bag for one molecule and one molecule only. And as you're working with these, some of them it takes many, many hours to get them to kind of pull in, but it will separate the molecules from all of their other friends who are molecules, and it will suck them in. And now you have something. The advantage of the cyclodextrin is that you can make something that is not soluble, you can make it soluble, to something that may not be bioavailable because your body's not able to make it soluble or attractive, or separate those molecules enough so that one molecule at a time can go through the gut wall. Well, we're doing that. We're like shaving a carrot, you're pulling off it. It's no longer a carrot, it's a bunch of little tiny shavings. Just imagine that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until like one molecule gets a chance to pass through your gut wall, where before it had all of its friends and they were holding on to each other and they couldn't be separated enough to go through the gut wall. The third thing that's really, really cool is you can take things that have therapeutic effect, and I've done probably 300 molecules so far. And many of these things that are approved substances for food or flavoring use or therapeutic use are so repugnant that no one can take them. And I've got a number of things that pharma wishes probably now, in hindsight, that they had looked at and done in this process, but something that is so horrible that you're not able to even take it into your body because of the smell and the taste, and even some of these are irritating. We overcome that because it's all locked in and protected. And the next thing that's really interesting is it's the stability. It makes the molecules so it's stable. You always look at a shelf life, and if you were to take the butyric acid and just take it and put it in a bottle and you were opening and closing it, not only would your house reek, but it's evaporating. It is volatile. It is going to evaporate and go away. This is why when you get spices, they have oils and terpenes. You need to keep them so that they're not exposed to the air because they're volatile. So we've got all these things that are really cool that we can work with. And so what ended up happening was I went to my buddy's lab down in Richmond, and I made up some of this powder, and the butyrate is now, there's virtually no smell, and you taste it and it's not offensive. You can just put it on your tongue and swallow it. But my wife, Tony, has very poor digestion. She doesn't have enough stomach acid. And the link that I told you about that I will send to David with the Dropbox, if you want to learn more about digestion, we won't take the time here now, but suffice it to say that when you don't have enough stomach acid, which she does not, there's a whole cascade that happens, and then you don't produce the enzymes necessary to break down your foods. So I knew that the cyclodextrin would hold in the butyrate. However, I also knew that her digestive cascade was probably not going to be able to break it out because it's not something where you simply add it to water and it's going to dissolve. It needs amylase, which is one of the enzymes produced in your body. And you can actually have salivary amylase when you chew on something for a while. And it's when your mom was right. And she said, chew your food and don't drink water. Chew it until you can swallow it. That's because it starts to produce amylase and starts to break things down, especially, all the complex sugars. So when you swallow through that cascade, at some point, if your digestion was absolutely perfect, you would produce some amylase from your pancreas and it would be in the duodenum. And I knew that her digestive cascade wasn't working. So I thought, well, I should just take some amylase and add it to this powder and I'll put it in a capsule. And then I wanted to get it further down her digestive system. So I made it into a time release. And that's a simple technology. Anyway, it really helped her and it helped a lot. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. And I ended up looking on the internet and went, well, that's a really interesting idea. So I looked up a number of molecules that had been put in cyclodextrin before, and there were dozens and hundreds of them. And pharma had started playing with this stuff. Actually, they use it as a thickening agent in some things like mayonnaise. But at one point, I started to go, well, her digestion didn't work. So maybe there's a rationale here for something. And I looked up to see the breakdown and digestion of a cyclodextrin, which would have a molecule in it. And all the data out there, all these scientists with all their PhDs and their MDs and their huge university educations, all would sit there in every paper and say, well, cyclodextrin is broken down by salivary amylase. And then, the next paper would say, cyclodextrin is broken down by pancreatic amylase in the digestive system. And I thought, well, there's so many doctors that, feed people anti-acid products because they don't understand digestion. What they learn in medical school is that if you have an upset stomach, take some Tums. So anyway, I started looking and looking, and I could find no reference whatsoever to putting an amylase with a cyclodextrin, and it just wasn't there. So you have to imagine that if you were relying on a perfect digestion of, let's say, a 17-year-old kid that's in great shape, has wonderful digestion, and they take some product that's got a cyclodextrin, it's going to get to your your duodenum. You're going to have the release of the amylase, and then it's going to break that product down, and it's going to get absorbed, over the next couple of 3-4 feet. It doesn't get further down over time. So there's so many molecules that we want to deliver over a time release, and also molecules like the butyric acid in the link product, that you want to get it further, all the way down to the colon, basically. So you can't expect that cyclodextrin, if you put it in a time release with no amylase, after a little bit, there's going to be no more degradation, and all the rest of that stuff's going to go in the toilet. So that's where the amylase comes in. And I looked at that, and I called up my patent attorney, and I said, Brian, start looking at this. And then he looked and looked and looked, and he went, nobody has ever done this. So all the planning that pharma had was that there would be certain drugs you could put into a cyclodextrin, but they didn't really work that well because they weren't getting them back out. So this is the thing. I filed this patent. There is a link on the national database for studies from the government, and Harvard University is doing a study with our butyric acid as our finished labeled product, probutyrate, and it's a standalone ingredient. And so they're doing that for ulcerative colitis. And they were going to do was a calcium or a sodium butyrate, but there's a physician who was working at the Cleveland Clinic. He's a major name physician. He's been on all the TV shows. He's been on CNN. He's been on TED Talks. He has books. And this doctor, he's an internist, had ulcerative colitis, and there was nothing that would help. All the traditional medicine wasn't helping him. None of the preventive medicine things that they normally would use were helping. So he went to Harvard, and he went to the Brigham and Williams Ulcerative Colitis Research Center, and they tried everything, and nothing was really happening. And this doctor happened to call up Dr. Perlmutter, who David knows well. And Dr. Perlmutter is a neurologist that I've known for years, and I shared with him that I had the butyric acid. So the doctor with the ulcerative colitis, happened to be talking to David Perlmutter, and David said, well, call Al. He's got this really cool butyric acid. So he called me, and I sent it to him. In 10 days, I get this call and an email, and it says, my ulcerative colitis is gone. So we actually have about a 2 or 2.5 page affidavit in my patent that's got, a page of his credentials and the description and all of that of how this worked. That's why Harvard decided to not use the calcium or sodium butyrate. They switched to ours, and that study is supposed to be in September, but it's probably going to get pushed off till next year because of the COVID thing. So in talking to Dr. Perlmutter, one of the things that he mentioned was that a doctor named Derek McFabe had done some research linking the lack of butyrate and too much propionic acid. Remember the little fatty acid I told you about that can be dangerous and nasty in your body? Well, it's linked in autism. And what happens is in your guts, you have all those good bacteria, and there's some bad bacteria, but there are ones that it's almost like a constant battle. They're fighting for food, which is what Mother Nature does all the time. And the group of microbes that makes propionic acid and the group of microbes that makes butyric acid are different groups. And then the one that makes acetic acid is another group entirely. And so they're all vying for the same source of food, which is fiber. So if the propionic guys win out over the butyrate guys, what ends up happening is propionic acid it's literally a deadly short chain fatty acid. I mean, it's produced in everybody's body, and it depends on the amount that's produced. But when we have generations of people who've been given antibiotics, it's changed the gut microbiome, and a mother can get pregnant, and if her body has too much of the bad little guys making the propionic acid, then her body, while the baby's in the womb, also has too high of a level of propionic acid, and they pass this ratio of microbes to the baby. And so for the first year, it's hard to tell if a child's autistic, but around, age 1.5, age 2 is when they start to see these problems. And it's because the whole time your body and your brain is being assaulted by propionic acid. And just as a quick step aside, there is a disease called propionic acidemia. And it's where 3 or 4, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, but there are some amino acids in all proteins have amino acids, and just in mother's milk you have protein, and there are amino acids that comprise this protein. But these amino acids, because of a genetic deficiency in this child that has propionic acidemia, these amino acids turn to propionic acid, and the child dies. I mean, in 7 to 10 days they'll be dead unless a nurse or a doctor says, we've got to test this child. They notice something's wrong. that point, this poor child for the rest of their life never really gets to eat protein because it has these amino acids. So stepping aside, we've stepped aside a lot. We're going to go back to where Dr. Perlmutter said, this might work and help kill children with autism. So we had a local child, Max, and he was kind of in the middle range of autism. He would talk, but he didn't look you in the eye. And whenever he went out with his mom, he'd hide under a coat and put his fingers in his ears, and he had to be tucked in just this way and that way. Max could never tie his shoes. His brain could not make his hands work to have that delicate ability to tie a knot. And he was 6 and it just killed him. He hated that. And he was also a nightmare at school. So we talked to the mom with the doctor and said, do you want to try this? I mean, she couldn't, there was no way she'd get this child to even remotely take calcium butyrate or sodium butyrate. I mean, he was offended by every taste and smell. So she put in his applesauce, December 16th, 2016. And that was for his evening meal. In the morning, she gave him his second dose in his applesauce. At 2 p.m, he tied his shoes and he was just stunned. It was like the world changed. He was now a big boy. I mean, it just, and he's now the star of the baseball team. But the part that was interesting was 2 days later, his mom pulled out his vitamins, lined the bottles up, and Max looked her in the eye and said, "Mommy, I like that one." And it was a green tea extract. He says, "That makes my brain feel good, Mommy." And then she lifted up a bottle of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which he'd been taking for 2 years because the doctor had recommended, well, autistic children many times are deficient in gamma-aminobutyric acid. They can't make this substance. So Max looked like she was the wicked witch of the West, and she just pulled out a knife and was going to attack him. He just said, "No, Mommy, no, I never want to take that, never again. It makes angry voices and they hurt my brain. They argue and they hurt. It hurts about me, no." So this kid, sorry, I got to interview him. He wanted to meet the man that made the magic powder. So anyway, Max had been taking this for 2 years and had not been able to have his brain, just like he couldn't tie his shoes. The brain has to communicate and have neural control of the muscle and actions. And he could not say the words, "I can't take that, Mommy." So at this point, I was screwed because I was retired, enjoying going to France and Italy with my wife. And we would go down to visit your dad in Palm Springs and all those things you get to do when you sold a company and made a few dollars and get to have fun and retire. I could see the writing on the wall, and my wife has seen the writing on the wall that there's too much to this technology where it's changing too many people's lives. I mean, we have things, we have the autism product, which is a medical food, right on the label for autistic children. We are doing an updated one within 2 months. We have one that's for Parkinson's, does about a 20% improvement on patients. I filed another new patent on a mucus product, which has got 6 ingredients, which literally dissolve mucus, changes an asthma patient literally overnight. But it's the only thing really that works on cystic fibrosis and bronchiectasis. We're going to have those included in a company. We're going to do a subsidiary company, and that will be a medical food for them. But the cystic fibrosis drug is $311,000 a year, and it doesn't work very well. It's got horrible side effects. So there are so many things that we can do in our arena with Tesseract. I'm not doing what I did with Thorn, where we have a multivitamin, we have vitamin C, we have some zinc. We're not doing anything. Everything we're doing is using my technology. We may add an ingredient or two that doesn't need to be in the molecular trap, but we're doing these standalones, highly therapeutic things. So the reason we're here is that my background with David and the fact that he actually cares. I mean, that's a different thing in this industry. That's why we're here, and that's why you have the opportunity to kind of take part in this technology. You don't want to be in the arena where you're being a doctor or you're treating a specific disease, but the things that we have can be put in combination with a few other things. And in the arena that you're at, you're providing people the opportunity to have a much, much better chance at health overall long-term and be able to take care of some of the things that have been bothering them for years. It's kind of like you get to pick up some chess pieces that you lost the war with Mother Nature. They took your queen. Well, you get to take your queen back. So that's kind of where we're at with the technology. So
Well, that's great information. And that does actually provide a good transition to some of the things I'd like to further talk about. You, as you just stated, whether it was with Thorne or now at Test Track, have been really focused on things like medical foods and really highly therapeutic doses for specific diseases and conditions that, as a regular dietary supplement, we can't really talk about. Want to get the benefit of in many respects, and so as we talked about ACTIVZ and our thrust in terms of increasing overall health and being able to take advantage of, I really like the way that you called it the God molecule. I remember a very conversation. You asked me, what do you know about butyric acid? And I said, nothing. I've never heard about it. I've never heard of it before. And I've been in the industry, in the supplement industry, for a long time, and I'm a kind of self-proclaimed science geek, and I've heard about a lot of things, but I've never heard about that. And then you sent me just reams and reams of information about it. And I started saying to myself, I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. And so when we were talking, it became clear that I had a problem that you knew butyric acid could solve in the form of your wife and the doctor with ulcerative colitis and on. But the solution to really working it was the cyclodextrin process that you're utilizing now. But we talked about some of the other things, and you mentioned the good bacteria versus the bad bacteria. And I think that's one of the reasons that we added the prebiotics that we did to link the glycerized licorice, the glucomannan, the inulin. That was, well, rather than me say what about that, why don't you tell us what do those ingredients do in regards to the good guys versus the bad guys?
Well, these are beneficial fibers. I mean, and that you can provide them and then provide the mechanism of action, which works as an anti-inflammatory, and the brain fuel, which is the butyrate. You're able to provide something and your body it has satiety where your brain is telling your gut, things are now better because you're getting a much better balance. So with our arena, much of what we do, the doctor's going to want the butyric acid, and then they're going to go, well, with this patient, I want these 3 fibers or these 2 fibers, or I don't want them to have any fiber at all. So, but as a general rule of thumb, picking these things instead of someone saying, oh, just go eat some flaxseed powder. I mean, that's the stuff that's going to be feeding the bad bacteria to begin with. So, it's kind of, you've found a balance here. And I don't know, at some point you may you may add another product, which is also going to have the butyrate and expand the line. That's in your arena. But as you said, by having these, it's a good choice and a good balance of beneficial fibers. And if you go on and take those ingredients, you do have to spend a little time kind of researching it. Anything in Google that says add, just take it out of your mind. You want to get down to stuff that are the studies. Those are the things that have a little more meat. So the other thing that's kind of interesting, since you're doing that, and it's not really a homework assignment, but if you have a bit of a science understanding and you look up some of the studies, when someone sells something and it's a miracle herb, there was a study that showed the active ingredients can do these miracle things. Well, when you click on a study and it's a university study, or it was funded by, a university or something, the first word, and it has to do with bioavailability and the action of an herb or something like that. The first thing you type in the search box is DMSO. And DMSO is a solvent that makes insoluble ingredients actually soluble. So they'll do a study with a rat and it'll show that, wow, this stuff is really great. It helps this rat, it got rid of their cancer. Well, the problem is that maybe that herb is 1% absorbed. So you'd have to eat 5 tablespoons. This is the way quercetin is. Quercetin is an incredible flavonoid. It's got many benefits, but it's 3% soluble and very, very, very poorly absorbed. We took it and put it in a little trap, the Cyclodextrins key trap, and it does amazing things. But if you start looking at research on things that are flavonoids, camphorol, luteolin, lutein, many, many times the effect, which was positive in the study, which everyone always looks at, wow, it did this. It's because they mixed it with some solvent to make it soluble, which we're doing without a solvent. We're doing it the safe way. They mix it with a solvent, so it'll get into the, into the cells and get through the gut or whatever they're doing. So kudos on the product. So I'm hoping it's helping a lot of people.
Everyone on this call was anxious when they heard that you were going to be the speaker today, because everyone has their own linked story. I could go around on this call and they could all give their own personal testimonial about either themselves or others, as can I. I've often told people, and maybe people on this call haven't heard, but I've never been part of a company that sold a product that I didn't absolutely believe in. And if they had products I didn't believe in, we got rid of them, or we entirely changed the claims or whatever. And through my research and through my years now of almost 30 years of being in the industry, I've come across a lot of really great things. But I've told people, Al, and you might think I'm a little bit crazy, but I've said, if I was stuck on a desert island and I was told I could only take one supplement with me, just one out of all the ones, it would be hard to pare it down, but I know which one I would take. I would take Link, because it has so much efficacy and so much importance from head to toe that I think, this is the one that's going in my backpack. And it's really interesting, and I think important for people to know that technology with the amylase and with the sustained release element going along with the Cyclodextrins system that we also get from you, so that full usage of the butyric acid, and we'll talk about tetrahydrocurcumin here in a second, but is being absorbed throughout the length of the GI tract, getting to where, and that's in our formula as well. Speaking of bioavailability, that's a big topic, and you touched on it, and people are always asking, well, how do you know that yours is more bioavailable? And I think it's really important for them to understand that you could be taking gallons of something, but if it can't get through the GI tract, if it's stuck in the stomach and lost in the stomach acid and never gets, it doesn't really help, right? And that's one of the problems with some of these ingredients.
Yeah. Absorption is everything. So when you get a lot of what we're doing, there are no definitive tests to show, a blood. It'd be wonderful to have a very simple blood test that would cost $90, and you could go have your blood drawn and they'd say, oh, your butyric acid level is fabulous. This is a volatile molecule, so it doesn't hang out and wait for you to analyze it. So traditionally, doctors have looked at a stool sample, and they will look at the fibers, but they will measure the short chain fatty acids in the stool and say, oh, well, yes, you do have some butyric acid levels and they appear to be in the normal range. Well, what comes out of you, it means that that's kind of the leftover stuff that didn't go through the gut wall. It was produced and it didn't, go do things in your body. So if you have any reasonable level that's in your stool, then you likely are producing a reasonable amount of butyric acid. But the thing is, you need to look at the propionic acid. If the propionic acid ratio to butyrate is out, then the propionic, your body is producing some of these short chain fatty acids. But if the propionic acid is anywhere high whatsoever, then it's an inflammatory problem throughout the body. So just measuring these things, it's kind of like if you could take, a tablespoon of the Link probutyrate powder, just a big tablespoon, and ate it, and it was in your system, you're still not going to be able to measure that in the blood. So if your body is utilizing it like it should, you shouldn't have much, if any, come out. So there's no real reliable, great test for this. So you end up dealing with therapeutic response. And I told you before once, a quick example, it's also in the patent, is a doctor. He's probably in his early 70s, president of a medical association, medical doctor. And he had an ostomy where, he had to have his colon removed, and they have the little spot on the side where they hook a bag, and that's where it all goes. And he had a problem a number of years before, so they had to move it to another side. It kept getting infected. And he was at the point with back in, it was late 2016 again, he was at the point where they said, we're going to have to move this again, because he had these large open fissures. I mean, I have all these pictures, And we actually have some at the patent office, and you don't even want to look at them. I mean, they're horrible. And they tried injections of corticosteroids. They tried all the vitamin regimens, and they tried every single thing they could. Nothing worked. And so he again was someone who happened to talk to, he talked to the other doctor who had ulcerative colitis, and he also talked to Dr. Perlmutter. And so I got this call. I didn't know the gentleman, and it was just, they gave him my cell number, and he called and said, is there anything we can do? Because he said, I'm afraid to go into the knife. I may die. So I said, well, we haven't even made this, bottled it and stuff. So I said, let me send you some. So send him some, and I got back these pictures of the improvement, and it changed his life. So he actually, this thing started healing up, and the improvement was dramatic. So he's in the patent too. So, these are things that you look for as therapeutic results. So I know when I had Thorne, we would introduce something. It's like the Andina product, which was their curcumin. They made a phytosome out of it, and they did it because it took me 5 years to convince them to do it. They had done one with another ingredient long before, and so I actually had them in our building in North Idaho. And I'm sitting there with Greg and Dr. Barnbardelli, who's the head of research. Said, you got to make this because curcumin is poorly absorbed. So they bound it to phosphatidylcholine, and it made it more absorbable. It's and it is better than regular curcumin. And then we always had this thing of, well, did you compare yours to Joe Blow's curcumin over here? Well, no. Did you compare it to this guy's curcumin? Because what ends up happening is, no matter how much money you spend on making a comparative study, there's always going to be somebody that says, well, my product wasn't in that study, but my product's a whole lot better. So you're going to lose that war. So so many things are very difficult to analyze, but you can tell by the therapeutic outcome in so many cases how much better something's doing. So that's a good little segue into your product. Is that you have to understand how for thousands of years people have had turmeric and yellow curry. You've used it for cooking, and they've always said, well, if you eat yellow curry, you will have less joint inflammation, and it's a good anti-inflammatory. And they knew this, but it wasn't until they got into modern chemistry someone said, well, we should figure out what the heck's in there that's doing it. So they found out, and this substance they called curcumin. And so then you had people who had, for years, we have a curcumin extract, and it's 20% from turmeric, and we take it and increase the activity. And then they got it up to where it was 95%. But curcumin's still not soluble, and it's very poorly absorbed. So when you're eating it, on a daily basis in so many foods, you're getting a higher amount of it. But when you're taking it in a little capsule, you're not getting that much. So what you're doing is you're taking supplements of something that is going to be beneficial if you took tablespoons of it. It's like quercetin. However, when it's alone and it's not been changed, it's not soluble. So then Andina came along and made the one with, it's called a liposome, and it made the curcumin. So it's not actually water soluble, but it was emulsified in a way where it's hooked to phosphatidylcholine, and your body loves phosphatidylcholine. It's kind of like, whoa, I'll have a glass of that, please. And so it gets pulled into your body, and you got better absorption. And it was 2, 3, 4 times what regular curcumin is. So we could have taken curcumin and put it in the Cyclodextrins trap, and I've done that. But the technology advanced to where you now have tetrahydrocurcumin. So if you're taking curcumin, the active molecule is tetrahydrocurcumin, which is not curcumin. Your body ends up converting this. So it's kind of like looking at a petroleum distilling plant. So you got crude oil, that's the turmeric. And then let's say you have diesel fuel, that's where you've got the curcumin. And then you have, kerosene, which is perhaps the one where it's the liposome. But to get to jet fuel, that's the part that, you're up in the atmosphere and you need to burn a high quality stuff that is actually the metabolite that's going to be the best. So a couple of companies have tetrahydrocurcumin, and it is more active because it's the active form, but it's still not soluble. And it's still, your activity is the real stuff. So your body, even though it only gets a small amount in, it's better stuff. But when we put it in the Cyclodextrins, it changed the world. We have people who say it's the best anti-inflammatory they've ever taken. So you have to kind of imagine these things as stages and steps over long periods of time. And there's so many things like this. You look at traditional medicines that are herbal medicines, people would take things, and if you took enough of it long enough, it would have an effect, but they didn't know the actives. Then you get to the part of the actives, and then the very quick story, well, we won't go into that. It's about people just taking, what happens is you can bring an ingredient in as a commodity, and you could be the first person on the market, but if you sell it as a commodity to a bunch of people, it may have great therapeutic effect. And then there are certain companies who will do it right, and that product will really help people. And then there'll be 95% of companies over here that make horrible, cheap tablets and crummy dosages. And then you run into a friend and go, oh, I was taking that St. John's wort. It was great. And they look at me and go, it's crap. It didn't do a thing for me. Well, that's because the ingredient may have been good, but it was put in a dosage form that was horrible. And this is something David and Angie can send you one of my editorials on. So, getting every time you can get to rocket fuel, it's great. It's just jet fuel, rocket fuel, where you're using the stuff that your body needs, and your body doesn't have to get to work for it. So, and this is where, the product you've got with the tetrahydrocurcumin, you've got that, and then you've got the boswellia, which is an anti-inflammatory, and it's got thousands of years. What ends up happening in the Middle East and in some places, the resin, the boswellia resin is kind of lumps that grow on the trees. And so they get the very best ones that don't have dust and dirt, and they go for a high price. And you'll see people, it's like chewing tobacco, the old guy with a spittoon. Well, they stick this resin under their cheek, between the cheek and the gum, and they'll just walk around all day. And it's a natural anti-inflammatory, but again, it's not soluble and it's poorly absorbed. But you're sitting there, it's better than nothing. But now we've gotten to the technologies where, and when you start, again, as we said before, the doctors are using a lot of our stuff that's a standalone, where they will bring in other things and do what they want to do. But when you get a complementary ingredient, the things kind of act better together than they do individually. And so in our arena, we want to stick to the thing where the doctors are treating major things that are, and they have to have that experience. Again, you get the opportunity to take advantage of all this stuff, where you get to use things that actually will work. And it's kind of scary.
I really like the idea. I really like how you spelled that out for us, that there's turmeric, which is the spice and is able, which we all enjoy in Indian food and Thai food and all types of food that uses turmeric as a spice. And yet, even though there's some benefit that comes from that, it's not as great as if you can then take a curcuminoid, a curcumin, and yet that's still very, very hard for the body to utilize. And then if it does utilize it, whatever part it utilizes, it breaks it into tetrahydrocurcumin. So we're kind of skipping a couple of steps. We're taking the jet fuel as it is, but even that is like on the outside trying to find a way to get in, right? So it'd be like having your rocket and having a tank full of jet fuel on the outside, but you don't have a hose to get it into the rocket. And so figure out a way to do it. And so if I understand correctly, that the Psylocke technology, the cyclodextrin, is a way to get that otherwise really valuable stuff that's just saying, man, how do I get that wonderful stuff in me? And that's where the Psylocke technology comes in. Is that right?
Right. And I mean, I should have had a little demo of a glass of something that's, not soluble, and you can stir it and go, wow, that's really cool. But that's the whole technology. And the key is being able to get it back out. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, you put the stuff in the safe, you close the door. Oh, I don't have the combination of the safe. That's where the Dex key comes in. It's a key, and it literally breaks that down so that it becomes bioavailable again. I've taken the butyric acid, and without the Dex key, it's in the Psylocke, and made it soluble and everything. I can put it in a glass of water and stir it up and let it sit for 6 weeks, and it'll just sit there. If I take the amylase and I put it in there, stir it up, after about 35, 40 minutes, you're going, ooh, and then you raise the glass up and go, ooh, because it's breaking it down. I mean, that's the science of it. I actually have photos of doing this, and I sent that to the patent office, all of these things. So, and you know, it's not like you can just go to the corner store and get some cyclodextrin and go, whoa, I'm going to just whip this up. No, there's a lot of technology of how to get those molecules to go in. Let's take an aside again. When we first did the batch of this, we went to a company down in California, and they were near a big city. And I said, well, this is kind of smelly. And they said, oh, we have this exhaust system that's great, and it's got some little carbon filters. We'll be fine. Well, after about an hour, the authorities showed up and went, you have got a 6-block square area where everyone's complaining and they're all wanting to go home because it stinks and it's horrible. And so then we went, So we went to another company that guaranteed us, they're in Utah. They said, well, you know, we'll do this in our fluid bed dryer and it'll work. And, you know, to get this reaction, and we had to run it for a long time. And again, the same thing happened. It was like 10 square blocks. And what ended up happening was in 1985, when I first learned of butyrate, and Dr. Neesby was selling his, you know, butyrates, he'd made calcium ones. And I thought, well, he doesn't really want to sell the raw material. I could just make that. So this is the very beginning of Thorn Research. I'm in an industrial park, and I just had little amounts, and I'm sitting back there under the hood and doing this. And then there's a knock on the door, and because the air is going out, and the landlord's there, and he's going, everybody in this entire building has left. What are you doing in there? And I went, So that was the end of my butyrate career until, you know, 2016. So.
Well, we're glad that you figured it out. It's really interesting in regards to curcumin, for example. There are so many turmeric products, so many curcumin out there, and it's also it seems like it's gotten to the point where everyone will acknowledge the poor absorbability of curcumin, but then they'll talk about their ways of addressing that, and it seems like there's really only 2 out there except for what we do. And it seems like most people say, well, we add piperin, black pepper extract, or BioPerin,
right,
or we had this liposomal delivery. And so maybe just if you can just take a quick minute to talk about, you know, the effect of piperin. Again, you touched on the liposomal, which has increased efficacy, and then of course what it does, and then with again putting it in the Silox system, what that does in terms of actually how that makes it absorbable by the body.
So basically, the pepper ones, a lot of people started using this because they did some studies and it showed that it increased absorption a little bit. But it's not like the pepper's picking a molecule up and carrying it through like a suitcase through an airport scanner. It's just not. From what I see of it, and they can correct me if I'm wrong or sue me, is that you're basically getting an irritation in the wall of the gut, so it's inflamed, and things the cells are separating a little bit because they're inflamed, and things can actually get through a little easier. I mean, if I took a knife and scraped my skin a whole bunch and rubbed on something, it's probably going to penetrate a whole lot better. And I could be wrong, but that's the way I look at it. I've never seen anybody who's dramatically had great therapeutic effect using some of the pepper-based products. I mean, I'm sure that they will improve the absorption slightly. The liposomal is used on a number of ingredients, and liposomal is not bad, but again, these are large molecules, and what they're doing is they're making them attractive to your body, and they are somewhat soluble, but they're making them attractive to your body because your body loves the lipids molecules that they take and hook the active molecule to. Your body kind of likes those and goes, oh, I'd like some of that, please. However, when you start looking at the therapeutic effect and the direct comparison, for the few things you can analyze, they are better than the plain raw material in a plain dosage form, but they're not going to be nearly as well absorbed as what we're doing because we're going smaller. We have, if you look and start looking at companies that are making we have this incredible system where we've mixed this with a special starch, and this is, it's 11 microns across. Well, I'm sorry, that's, we're 1,000 times smaller, so we're actually one molecule at a time. And, it is a better system. There's no way around it. The other thing that's a disadvantage is unless you took a liposomal and put it into a capsule and then banned it or put it in a soft gel, trying to get someone to take something under their tongue and say, hold it there for 3 minutes because it'll get absorbed through, under your tongue through the oral cavity. It's kind of difficult because the liposomal stuff is horrible tasting. I mean, it's just, I don't care what you're putting in a liposome, it does not taste good. So then you have, again, where if you're swallowing it, you still have this thing of how do you get some transit here down far enough in the gut. And two, if you're just taking it in the mouth, you're going to get some absorption, but your patient compliance is going to go. I mean, it's like the butyrates originally. People just, after a little bit, they go. My wife tried some liposomal stuff once, and it was like 3 days later, she just threw it out and said, I just can't do this. And, I'm sure if I was dying, I would want, and that was the only method, I would want to take the liposomal, but it is pretty nasty. I mean, it's almost, worth buying a bottle and putting your mask on and sharing it among friends from 6 feet away. It's terrible.
Well, I think when Paige earlier showed the 3D rendering of the molecule, we were able to see the outside covering and how the molecule of butyric acid or tetrahydrocurcumin is in the middle of that. You'd mentioned that the outside shell, the cyclodextrin itself, is very water soluble. It's very hydrophilic. And I think you'd explained to me at one point how that actually helps it get sucked through the stomach wall. How it gets through because of that hydrophilic or water level.
What happens is it makes it so you can make a soluble solution and then you can slide your active molecule in, but it's not traveling through the gut wall by as an intact substance. What's happening is a few of them will. I mean, you do have larger areas between cells where things can travel through, which is where you get leaky gut syndrome. But when you're talking about the actual weight, that's why we have the Dex key, because when it's there, it's only dependent on one thing: moisture. So your body temperature, anywhere in the range of a normal body temperature, it's going to have the ability to have that enzyme be active. But as I said, when I took the butyric acid without the enzyme, put it in a glass of water, and it sat there for days. And then when I added the enzyme, it was 30 to 45 minutes, and then I could smell the butyric acid. Well, in your gut, this is what's happening: is you are breaking down that cyclodextrin, the Cyclodextrin trap, and then as soon as that thing's released, it has the ability to go through the gut wall because the gut wants to accept it, because it's just on its own. It's like, that little traveler at the train station is all alone. There's no crowd. And and I think I talked to you before, if you just take a spoon of olive oil and put it on top of a glass of water, it all stays together and you can try and separate it, but the molecules will adhere together and they'll want to hang out with their friends. That's the world of molecules. What we want to do is get them all separated completely. And so that way, once they're released, then they can immediately go through the gut wall. And that's what ends up happening. That's where the therapeutic effect of this stuff is. So yeah, the actual Psylocke is not traveling through the gut wall. It's you're giving, once you break it down, you're giving this incredible little one molecule. And it's hard for the brain to understand or fathom. If you look at a powder and it's not soluble and it's a oil base or something, and you look at, there's these little grains. Well, those little grains are huge when you come into the nanometer world. So, when I say that, a cyclodextrin, that the largest one is 65 nanometers. Okay, in 1 yard, if you divide that into a billion little things, 65 of those are the absolute largest part of this one. So you start counting out, and you could have millions and millions and millions and millions of individual molecules just in this lid. And just that amount of space would have literally millions of individual molecules that have been sucked in. And when you make these things, it's kind of cool, where you might have something that's kind of a faint orangish color or something in it, or faint brown, and that's the original raw material. And then the cyclodextrin is white, and you're sitting there doing this reaction with the shear mixing and all the things, and you're using various methods. And then you can see the reaction starting to take place, and then it starts to thicken a little, and then you add some more water and adjust everything. But at some point, in most cases, you look at them and suddenly the color starts to disappear because the molecules have been separated and they're pulled inside that cyclodextrin. And it's really kind of cool. It's kind of fun. So if you took something like the tetrahydrocurcumin, when you get the product that we ship to you, which is already in the Silox system, you're getting something that's a very faint yellow. Well, when we start out with that, it is more yellow than that, but you don't see it anymore because it's pulled in there. And then, you know, it's better delivery, it's more stable, and we can control everything it does. I mean, so
Well,
it's like science fiction we control.
Stay tuned. Know that at least one person on this call would like us to put a video together of that, showing it to, you know, that reaction. I'm not sure if we can maybe do kind of a time lapse type of video or something. That'd be kind of cool for everybody to see. Well, I know that our time's getting short. Al has mentioned, he said he's, I think, done 300 molecules, put them in Czap. I can let everyone know that we are talking with him routinely, and his partner Will, about other products that we are interested in introducing to all of you. Some are more practical than others, some are more specific. For example, the mucus product that he mentioned, unbelievable application for cystic fibrosis and things like that. And yet you can say that's a pretty small niche that we're probably not going to go after. We're probably not going to go after the cystic fibrosis crowd, even though I know some people who have been devastated by that in their families, and it's very much necessary. So I'm grateful that Al and Tesseract are out there, because they're providing real solutions for some real problems. But you know, if I think about butyric acid, I think about tetrahydrocurcumin, and I think about the fact that nature has created these molecules that we can utilize. And it's taken years for the science to catch up to how do we best utilize those things. You know, isn't it interesting as we think of, as Al was explaining, how the trap works and getting it through the stomach wall. Well, we know that butyric acid is actually the fuel of choice of the endothelial cells that comprise the stomach wall. And that the cascade of benefits by not only just healing the gut and healing these things like ulcerative colitis, but how much more now is your system ready to accept nutrients and utilize other things that if we're making good decisions, it's in a much better position to accept than it would have been without the butyric acid. And similarly, you know, the chronic low-grade inflammation that we're affecting, that now scientists are saying is really the out there, and linked to cancer and heart disease and all types of ailments, if we can just control that. Well, you know, there's a science out there that nature has provided a curcuminoid in the form of curcumin, and then science has added to that with tetrahydrocurcumin, and yet there was still a problem. How do you get the goodness in you? And Al is, you know, he talked about how he was the most hated man in the industry. I don't know about that, but what I can tell you is that the natural products industry has expos, big, huge conventions, one that's the largest of which is held in Anaheim every year. And tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people show up to the Anaheim Convention Center, and it is humongous, and it is packed to the rafters with companies and products and information, and there's research conferences that go on in connection with that. And I can tell you, I've walked that floor with Al Czap. And over the years, because I've been in the industry and I'm getting to be an OG now, I know quite a few people, but everybody knows Al Czap. And it's like walking with Moses and the parting of the Red Sea, because everybody recognizes that Al Czap is a true pioneer, a true visionary, and someone that's changed the world with his technology. And I can tell you that, and again, I'll just backtrack. We had genomics, okay, that being introduced to Mexico. It wasn't available for the US. And I was wondering, what can we do out there? What can we offer the US and then these other markets? And as I was pondering on that, I'd been introduced to other products, and I knew other formulators. And all of a sudden, out of the blue or not, the name Al Czap came to mind. And the rest is history. And we're literally changing tens of thousands of lives, even in the very early stages of our company, with making it available. And what's also interesting is that you guys are kind of like the DEX key system. And what I mean by that is, without you, without all of us introducing it to others, you have this great science out there that's still not getting inside anybody unless even the Siloc technology is not being utilized, unless it's introduced to other people who they find out about it. So all of you are very instrumental. You're very, you have this great molecule, you have this great delivery system, and yet you're the final link in the chain in order to get that out there to people and change their lives. And that's pretty incredible to think about what you're part of, and how many degrees of separation we are from top-notch scientists, from someone at the Cleveland Clinic, from a study at Harvard Medical, and Brigham and Williams is one of the best research hospitals in the world.
Yes.
And introducing to people every day is going to be a subject of a major study. So that's pretty amazing. So Paige, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks, Al.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David, for hosting this call today and providing us an opportunity to listen to Mr. Al Czap. Mr. Czap, that was amazing. And I know you have a huge fan club right now with us. So thank you for your time today and your knowledge and sharing it with us. So with that, I'm going to sign off the call today. Thank you all for joining us, and check in with us next Saturday, the same place at the same time.
Take care.